Where do writers get their ideas from? And how can you, as an amateur writer, benefit by having this question answered by professional writers? We're going to be answering those questions and more, and we're starting right now. Ask any professional writer, what question do you get asked more than anything else in the world? And they will instantly tell you the biggest question is, where do writers get their ideas from? But it actually is an interesting question, because when you read a book, these ideas are amazing. But the question is, how does writers like Stephen King write so many novels? And we have to ask ourselves, where do you get these ideas? Because amateur writers, they will tell you the hardest thing about writing is actually coming up with the original idea. They're not sure where to get the ideas from, and they find themselves just sitting in front of their laptop, staring at the computer screen, trying to come up with ideas. Whereas in fact, professional writers will tell you that's the worst thing you can do, is to stare at the computer screen, trying to come up with ideas. If you stare at a white computer screen, that's all you're going to have in your head, is a blank white screen in your head with no ideas coming to you. But professional writers like Stephen King will tell you that the ideas come to him out of nowhere. It's what he calls the spark of the idea. It's where you all of a sudden, when you least expect it, you have this feeling, this idea for a novel. You don't know how it's going to end. You don't know the characters. You don't know the plot, but yet somehow there is a feeling within you when you experience something, you see something out of the blue, all of a sudden an idea comes to you that you think this could make for a great novel. A lot of times Stephen King does not come up with his ideas while just staring at a computer screen. He says that one of the things he did was he came up with a list of the things that people fear the most. What are the biggest phobias people have? What scares people the most? And after figuring this out, he will then use each of those ideas as the antagonist. He will then create average everyday people who he will then have to, these characters will then have to work with each other to defeat this bad antagonist. But the antagonist is based off of the list of things that people fear. But the ideas can come to him just out of nowhere. You look at the novel Cujo about a rabid Saint Bernard. Many years ago, he was having car trouble, so he took a car to a farmer who a friend recommended him. And when he went to the farm, there was a big Saint Bernard, and the dog owner said to Stephen King, "Oh, you're fine. He's friendly. Cujo is friendly." And when Stephen King went to get out of the car, all of a sudden the dog jumped up and growled at him. And Stephen King quickly got back into his car. And all of a sudden, without even realizing, Stephen King came up with the idea for Cujo about what would happen if he was left on this farm by himself with a rabid Saint Bernard circling the car. Well, on his way there to the farm, he didn't know that this idea was going to come to him. But this book ended up selling millions, and it was made into a movie. And while he was on the way to the farm, he had no idea that this story was going to come to him. It just did. One time he was driving along the highway, and he got off the highway, and he entered a small town where all the streets were empty. There was no one around. And he wondered, where is everyone? And then he quickly thought, they're all dead. And the sheriff was the one who killed them. He had no idea that this idea was going to come to him. But he ended up having this flash of an idea in his head. He didn't know how it was going to end. He didn't know who the main characters were or the character arcs. But he had this idea that he then made into a novel called Desperation, which ended up selling millions. Stephen King will be the first one to tell you that he does not force himself to come up with ideas, but he just lets them come to him. When you just go for a walk, you might see something that just stands out, something out of the ordinary. And all of a sudden you can feel that flash of an idea in your mind. You can't explain it to anyone, A lot of successful writers who write many books cannot really put into words what they mean when they feel that spark, that flash of an idea where they just know that that idea can be made into a novel. They don't know how it's going to end, but they just know that there's something there. Doesn't guarantee that every flash that they have will be made into a novel that sells millions. There are many times an author can have a flash of an idea and they forget it. Someone once asked Stephen King, do you write down all your ideas? And he says, I never write them down, because if I have to write them down, they weren't worth remembering. The best ideas are the ones that come to him that never leave him, that he has to write them down. Because if he doesn't, the idea will just haunt his mind day after day. So he writes the idea down just to get it out of his head. It's similar to how a comedian works. A comedian can come up with an idea for a joke, but they sense that they know it will be funny. They may not know the punchline, but they have this belief, this inner idea that the joke will work, that it can actually make an audience laugh. If you would ask a comedian, how do you know this? They don't really know how to explain it, but it's just something inside of them that they know that the joke is going to work. It's the flash of an idea that comes to them, not when they're just sitting down staring at a screen, forcing themselves to come up with an idea, but when they're out for a walk and all of a sudden they see something that just creates that spark in their mind. Stephen King has said that all of his ideas start off as short stories, and he will just write, and as he's writing them, if he thinks of new ideas, he adds them to the novel. And he adds it to the story until it eventually becomes a novel. It can be 400 or 600 pages or 1,000. But while he is writing his short story, if new ideas do not come to him, then he just stops. The story has told itself. The story has concluded. So he doesn't sit down with the idea that he is going to write a 1,000-page novel. He sits down with the belief that he wants to tell a story. Sometimes that story is no more than 20 or 30 pages, maybe 200 or 300, or maybe it can turn into a full novel that's 1,000. But when he comes up with every one of his ideas, he sits down to write a short story. And while he is writing, if he thinks of ideas, he just adds them. And a lot of writers will talk about how they feel that energy rush, the adrenaline rush while writing, where they want to write the story as fast as possible because they can see it playing out as like a movie in their mind. They can see the characters talking to one another, and they simply write down what they hear. They don't force themselves to create dialogue. They simply write down the dialogue that they hear in their mind. And they actually feel a rush of adrenaline as though they're watching a movie playing out in their mind, and they simply write down what's going on in there. Other writers will say that they come up with ideas while reading other novels or watching movies. How many times have you been watching a movie where the characters are doing something that you're interested in, and all of a sudden the movie goes in a different direction, a direction you didn't like? You were kind of hoping that maybe the characters would stay on the path they were in the beginning. Well, this can be an opportunity for you to now write a story in which those characters actually stayed on that journey that you wanted them to stay on. How many times have you been watching a movie where the direction of the movie just isn't what you liked? Well, now you can write your own story in which that direction is the story that you want. Have you ever been reading a book where the characters end up doing or saying something that you don't like? Now is the opportunity for you to write your own story where the characters can now do what you want them to do. And you end up making so many changes that the story that you end up coming up with at the end is completely different than the story that inspired you. You would be amazed at how many great novels that have been written were actually inspired by another novel. Now, some people would say, well, are you just ripping off the novel? Well, the thing is that the writer will make so many changes that when you look at their novel and the novel that inspired them, it's just so night and day. You can't even believe that they were actually inspired by that other novel because they're so opposite. Because you make enough changes here and there that eventually, by the time you get to the end, you have made so many changes that maybe you were reading a drama taking place in the Old West, and by the time you're finished, it's an action novel in science fiction taking place in outer space. And people can't even begin to imagine how your novel was inspired by some Western drama. But you would be amazed at how many writers come up with ideas when watching a movie. Maybe there was a moment, a flash in a moment in a movie that caught the writer's attention. And they thought, oh, that's interesting. Who was that character in the background? What was that building, that car in the background? And all of a sudden, they will be able to create an entire novel based on that one moment that happened in a movie. If you ask them what inspired that novel, they'd say, oh, I was inspired by that 1 second that I saw in a movie. And you're blown away by that. You're thinking, wow, that one little moment in a movie inspired an entire novel. But what writers do not do is force themselves to come up with ideas by staring at a screen. And most writers will tell you that they're inspired by novels, movies, life, things that they read in a newspaper. And they daydream. All of a sudden, their daydreaming kicks in. They can now see that brand new movie playing out in their mind. They can now see that brand new novel playing out in their mind. And they just simply write down what they see and hear. Maybe they read something in a newspaper and they start daydreaming about it. And they just simply write down what is going on inside of their mind. But they don't force themselves to come up with an idea. They let the ideas come to them. Some writers will tell you they can come up with 2 or 3 ideas in 1 week, or go 2 or 3 months without any ideas. It's the funny thing about being a writer. Sometimes you can come up with an idea, and while you're writing that novel, you think of a brand new idea for another novel. So now you have 2 novels ready to go in 1 day. Or sometimes you can go 2 or 3 weeks without having any ideas coming to you. You don't feel that spark, or as Stephen King calls it, the voice. Charles Dickens said that he would come up with the character's name. And all of a sudden, when he comes up with the character's name and the title, the story just comes to him. He can hear those characters speaking. He can have conversations with them. And he can see the story playing out in his mind, simply by coming up with the character's name and the title of the story. And all of a sudden, the pieces fall into place. It's a unique thing. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my website, where I have a tremendous number of blogs that will help you become the greatest writer you can be. In fact, I'm going to leave a link to my website in the description down below, where you can visit my website right away and start learning. And if you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my next video on why there is no such thing as a dead genre. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to leave a link to that video right here, and you can click on that video right now and start watching.